Bulavinaka, Fiji, and welcome to the State of the Fijian, a show where we look at the state and the Fijian like you and I and the politics that affects us all. 2014 was an important year for Fiji as we went to elections and people got the chance to vote for their own representatives. The 2014 elections introduced to us new faces and reintroduced old faces also. One of the new faces was the Vice President of the Fiji Law Society, the former President of the National Federation Party, Fiji's oldest political party, who went on to become an MP. She's now a leader of her own political party. Joining us today in studios is Ms. Tupou Draunidalo. Tupou, nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Good, thanks.
You have had an interesting career. You have been educated in Australia. You have been a former MP. You were president of Fiji's oldest political party. And now you have your own political party where you're party leader. You were born into a family of chiefs from the western and eastern sides of Fiji, a family that has been involved in the political history of Fiji. How has it been, this political journey of yours?
Interesting.
What does that mean, interesting? I mean, explain for us.
I myself sometimes stop to think how interesting a life it's been so far, in the sense that it hasn't been uneventful. Uneventful, you know, some people like uneventful. And to be very honest, sometimes when there's a lot of pressure and when there's a lot of angst that comes my way, sometimes I wonder, I might crave uneventful now.
How has it been? Your parents have been part of Fiji's politics. How has been that learning journey? How has that contributed to your political life?
Well, I learned from because I like to think I'm a good observer and listener, and to me those are very important things. So I just take it in my stride, yeah. And I think in traditional families, in Tokay families particularly, you know, we are not pulled aside and taught the history of Rome, as it were. You're supposed to observe and do as you.
And so you were one of those few women who went to Parliament after 2014. 8 years of military rule. Women have been at some point forefront in trying to fight the militarism.
Yes.
You were one of them. You represented the deposed Prime Minister Lesene Ngarase in his court case. You are against coup. You have spoken out multiple times on the coup culture in Fiji. I want to talk about the fact that you are a woman politician. What has that journey been like? I was just part of a forum a few days ago. We talked about the women experience in politics.
Yeah.
What has been your experience as a woman?
Well, again, like I said, sometimes I do crave uneventful because I don't choose particularly easy paths. If I chose an easy path, my life would be very easy.
You went on to become the president of the National Federation Party.
That's correct.
And that's one of the oldest political, well, that's the oldest political party in Fiji.
Party, yes.
Then you went on and resigned. But we're going to talk about that in a while. How was that journey? I really want to understand how your political career has been.
Well, I've said it before publicly, and that is what happened. I mean, the National Federation Party and the Fiji Labour Party were a part of our home for a long time. But mind you, so was the Alliance Party from, way young. Because most of my family were in the Alliance Party, then there was the breakaway to the Labour Party. Because, there were differences of political opinion. That's all it was, well, we'd like to think.
And now you are the only female leader of a political party. We're nearing elections next year, sometime. What do you think about women's participation in politics in general?
I think I'd like to encourage more women to participate. I think we bring a different perspective. And if you see the most acrimonious things that happen, they don't usually involve the women leaders. Although I certainly did my best to break out of that mold in terms of being rather vociferous against the military and the coup culture. But I thought it was something that had to be done, and I have no regrets.
I do want to ask this, though. You have been very vocal against certain members of parliament who are female about how they campaign, how they are in the public life. And there's this very interesting saying by Madeleine Albright, a special place in hell for women who do not support other women. I want to get your views. How is it that you are a woman MP but there has been a lot of back and forth between you and, for example, Honorable Tambuya.
I don't think there's been, I think there's just been one back and forth between us, and that was prominent because, in fact, I was talking to her party leader then, Mr. Rambuka. She injected herself into the equation, and me believing in equal rights, why should I give her soft treatment because she's a woman? She will get equal treatment. I will give them the same, Rambuka and her.
And what are your thoughts on the way that our female parliamentarians are being treated right now? In the very beginning of the 2018 first parliamentary sitting, and afterwards, there were comments about how certain female MPs were dressing within their political party. Outside of it, there were comments recently of the Prime Minister calling Honorable Gerengere Tambua a beauty queen. We have a very low percentage of women who represent women in parliament. And it does not seem that our current leadership is nurturing women to enter politics. It's making it harder for them.
Yeah, thank you. I like that question. I don't think that established politicians should give an easier time to people just because of their gender or whatever it is. I think politics has always been a rough and tumble, and I, as a woman, I don't want someone to patronize me and give me an easy time. And I certainly have not been patronized. I've been given the baptism of fire like most people. Although I do get the occasional feedback that, no, you get very soft hands compared to what you've said because of traditional relations and whatnot. I get that. But, yeah, no, I don't, nobody has ever talked to me about how I dressed. Or the Honorable Rondrondro. And no one has ever mentioned, I don't know. I think... I don't know, you'll have to ask the people who make those comments, but that is just nonsense to make any issue of how any politician dresses, especially women, if we're trying to encourage them. Who cares what they wear? We want to know what they think.
Exactly.
What's in their brain.
We are going to continue this conversation with Tupou Draunidalo when we come after this break. Welcome back. We are on the State of the Fijian talking to Ms. Tupou Draunidalo. Tupou, I want to ask, social media. You've been very active on social media. You have some controversial stuff on social media also. I want to talk about the role social media is playing in Fijian politics right now. What are your views on that?
Well, it's like what it plays around the world. And we've seen what's come out of the Senate hearings in Washington, where the whistleblower, and I've written about this in 2 articles in the Fiji Sun, that, those sites prefer to promote conflict and have people tagging on to that because that's how people get onto their platforms to see the fight, and it sells ads. So it can be, it should be used for the good, but unfortunately, it's some people...
Do you think our politicians are equipped to utilize social media?
To be honest, I think most politicians in Fiji, if not all, relatively play good online. But the problem is they're trolls. Yeah, they're trolls who are influenced to do other things. And I've had a lot of experience with a few of them, who come up and just say the most baseless things. And I'm not one to be known as a doormat or to take things lying down. So, of course, I'll respond, which is silly. I shouldn't respond. And
you have also been, accused of blocking people on social media.
That is one of
removing accessibility.
One of my favorite things to do because I don't want to be engaging with people who are not engaging their brain.
But don't you think it's important as someone who's asking people to vote for them, to know what your values are, to actually be accessible to the public?
Except there are people that come on to antagonize. They deliberately come on to antagonize and to skewer the message. As far as I'm concerned, the messages I'm trying to get out are very important. Some will say that it's very highbrow, but that's okay. I want the level of our discussion to be at a high level. When people come in at a low level, thankfully I've gone to the mute button now. I've discovered it instead of going to the block button. So it works out very well.
I want to play something. This is a good segue. I want to play something that Honorable Gerengere Tambua said at the Women's in Politics Forum a few days ago. Let's have a listen on what she said.
When voters don't have much information about the candidates beyond the basic information like gender, they're more likely to rely on on stereotypes. Several studies have even suggested that voters who make their choice with little or outside knowledge are more likely to support a man. So how does one counter this? I reckon, be more visible.
So she said this in the context of women politicians and men politicians, but she talks about visibility. And I'm picking this up from social media chatter about how politicians, one, do not know how to use social media and how they block accessibility to individuals to understand what the values of politicians are. And I'm asking again, are politicians equipped to understand how social media can influence their campaigns in Fiji?
I'm sure reading from other politicians that they know how it is that they need to engage. But I think I certainly do it, but I've seen others take it on. They just mute people. Block is the worst. It's like this, that's the option you just don't want to deal with. But they mute people if they don't want to engage at that level. And like I've said, Abdul, one of the big problems overseas with social media, misinformation, is because we're giving platform, and there are some views that we don't need to hear. There are views of racism, antagonism, and trying to get people to fight against each other. We don't want to entertain those views. We want to talk about policy, things that are important to improve people's lives. We want to keep the discussion at that level. And in terms of visibility, no, I absolutely agree with what the Honorable Tupou has said. But I think in my case, I don't find that an issue. When I go out, people, because I've got ultra exposure before from whatever posts I used to have. But of course, there has been a lot of misinformation I've noticed in the last elections that the parties, we joked about this in the Hope Party, that at one stage it seemed like the opposition parties hated Hope more than they did Fiji First.
Oh, how was that?
With the kinds of things that their trolls said online and in person, wherever we went. We would get this feedback, and we was like, well, but we wore it, and I still do, wear it as a badge of honor that the other non-government parties would dislike us more than they dislike Fiji First.
I'm going to move on to the next policy question that we have got. I'm quoting from Radio New Zealand, which quoted John Apted, a prominent Fiji lawyer, who said the issue during the COVID-19 pandemic was how far and in what circumstances the requirement for a person to be vaccinated as a condition of some benefit could be imposed by a state, an employer, school, or public persons like a retailer or shop. This is, of course, with regards to COVID-19 and government's no jab, no job policy, which has raised a few eyebrows. There have been, I think, a few court cases. What would a Hope Party initiative be at this point? If Hope was in government, what would you have done as we try to open up Fiji, do an economic recovery initiative?
Well, I've been agreeing with what the government has been doing in terms of the way they've dealt with COVID-19. And we've seen that the bigger countries with more money, more hospitals, and they've got endless amount supply of money to bring all sorts of medical equipment and whatever that they need. Australia and New Zealand, our closest. What happened here is exactly what transpired in New South Wales and then later in New Zealand. And just 2 days ago, I think, or yesterday, the Prime Minister of New Zealand was asked, are you, something along the lines where you're talking as though there are two classes of people now in New Zealand, those who are vaccinated and those who aren't. And those who are vaccinated get certain privileges, and those who are unvaccinated, is that what? And in fact, the person asking, the journalist, was sort of trying to make it out that that's not exactly what she was saying. But she said, yep, that's exactly what I'm saying. So,
So how do we deal with people who don't believe in the vaccine, or they're vaccine anti-vaxxers, or they're hesitating to get the vaccine because of some valid concern? How do we deal with that?
Well, the experts have put out various step-by-step measures on how to convince them. One prominent amongst that is not to talk down to people. So that's not something I'm going to be qualified for. There are experts to do this. And I think government should run those programs and try and convince and get everybody. But if you see our vaccination rates, very impressive. I'm very impressed with Fijians.
There was lots of talk, and you got involved in this on Twitter, about how government is not doing a lockdown. And government went on to say, oh, it's something that the elites would say. But then, because people are not able to walk, but then people are still in lockdown. They aren't able to go to work. The people who need that money, the people who are doing, manual labor, they weren't able to go to work. There was evidence to suggest that had we gone into a hard lockdown, we may have come to an end of this second wave faster. What are your opinions on that?
Well, again, Abdul, I would like Fijians to look at what happened in New South Wales and take it from there. New South Wales, the economy, I think, is more than 10 times bigger than Fiji, maybe 100 times bigger than Fiji, billions and billions of dollars. But their lockdown was, what they called a hard lockdown was softer than ours.
Yeah.
Ours, ours was pretty harsh. It was pretty harsh. I mean, we had curfews for a long time. What was it? 8 p.m.?
Yep.
Yeah.
Starting from 8.
For a long time, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. when we were kept hostages in our own homes. I mean, if that's not hard lockdown, I don't know what is. But, like I said, countries like Australia and New South Wales, the richest economy in Australia, if they can have, lockdowns and what, we should be very grateful at how our government dealt with ours. Yeah.
We're going to return after this break to talk more on COVID and other issues that affect us as Fijians. Welcome back. You are on the State of the Fijian and we're talking to Ms. Tupou Draunidalo. I'm going to continue asking on COVID. One of the issues that have come up a lot is about Fiji Airways and the Fijian government bailing out the airline. Recently, I think in the last parliament sitting, it was revealed that the Fijian government now has a 75% stake. The National Federation Party, I've seen a post by Niko Nawaikula, which has said we need to let go of the airline. We cannot be putting so much of taxpayer money into that. What would be the Hope government's outlook on this?
I think it's important to have a national airline, especially when we have a lot invested in tourism. If we invest so much in resorts and all of that, then why are we going to give up the airline? The two go together. And I'm very confused with these non-government parties who are attacking Fiji Airways and the guarantees that they're given. On one hand, they want the sacked workers to go back immediately. On another hand, they want the company to be let go. So, Abdul, before I address the issue substantially, first you must ask them to make up their mind.
Moving on, I want to ask a little bit about youth in politics. Do you see yourself as a new generation of young politician? You're fairly new. I understand you contested the election in 2000, but you came into parliament in 2014, just after after our military government,
Well, I'm happy if people consider me to be new, but one of the things that we laugh about with my friends and colleagues is how in Fiji, the leaders are still in their 70s and 80s. We don't want to be ageist, but we tell each other, look, we're still young because we are in our late 40s or mid 40s. So hooray to that. But, come on, right now I'm always trying to encourage the 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. I mean, that's what happens overseas. And we should have it here because why should the people who are 20s and 30s, why should they vote for people who are in the late 40s and 50s as the young? What I might find acceptable, people in their 20s and 30s may be rolling their eyes and thinking I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah. So what more can be done to have more young people in politics?
I think it's always been about leadership. It's up to the political party leaders. If they go out and find those candidates, they will be able to put young people in. Yeah. But from my experience, not just the Hope Party, but in other parties that I've observed over the years, they attract young people, but they put them down the list. Yeah. Whereas if we attract young people, and we're fortunate to get young people who are substantive and can stand up in parliament and fight for the issues we want them to fight for, we should put them up the list.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about political parties needing to have that will, but I, as a young person, I'm asking, do you think our government should have that political will? 70% or 60% of our population are under 40.
Yeah.
But we don't have things like temporary special measures. We talk about young people in politics, but we really are just talking about it. Literally, we have no policies in place which says we will have young people at the table by putting TSMs. What would a Hope Party, would a Hope government look at TSMs as a possibility for young people, people with disability, for women?
I would prefer that the parties do it, and some political parties, but I have never had that problem.
But there's nothing
of
binding,
trying to,
isn't it?
It's not binding, but I can appeal directly to the leader of the opposition and to the leader of government. If you want young people to participate more in the next elections and have a say and stand up in parliament, please put 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds who qualify into your party onto your list. Please put them up the list. I challenge you to put 5 in that category in your top 10. That would be great.
Oh, thank you. Young people are listening. So we have this segment in our show where we ask you questions from the public.
Yeah.
So these are not our questions. We have reached out to a few young people. We have reached out to a few Fijians to say, what do you want to ask Mr. Draunidalo? I'm going to play you a video by Rakeen, who's a young person. Let's hear what question he has for you.
Hello, Ms. Tupou. What are the 3 things the Hope Party will do differently if chosen in the next election?
So what are the 3 priorities of our Hope government if they were to come in the next election?
We talked about this at the last election, and we remain with it, and that's the wages, improving the wages in this country.
What would it look like?
We stick with up to $10 minimum wage, sector by sector, consultations, no forced line.
Yeah.
The second big issue we think is education. We really want to tackle the streams of education. We want our education system to cater from Form 5, 6, and 7. Fijian students should be able to choose which big stream they fall into. If they want academia, they go to academia. If they want vocation and arts, they go in there. And if they want to concentrate on sports, they go on that stream. All 3 can do amazing things for our economy, but as it is, we are focusing only on academia, which is okay for maybe students like me, although I think I had a more artistic flair and I was forced into academia by our education system. But you know, we've seen all around the world what Fijian sports people and what Fijian artists can do. And in Australia, there was a report, I wish I had brought that along with me, the amount of money that the arts earns for the Australian economy.
Right.
I think we are really letting down a big segment of our people by not catering to their talents.
Yeah. What would be the 3rd priority?
3rd priority, good question. The private sector is something we've always talked a lot about. And in the last elections, we talked about the private sector being the development partner of government.
Right.
And I've said in a show that we did online that the biggest thing that the private sector does not like is red tape. That's not to say that government regulation will pull back completely, but you know, I see this government is doing its bit on from the last elections. They've really gone out to give incentives and all of that. We will also do more for the private sector along those lines because we want to encourage economic growth. That's for all Fijians.
Okay. I'm going to play another clip. This is by Lasarusa Seru, and this is their question.
There is a rise in sexual and gender-based violence in Fiji towards women, children, and the LGBT community. What steps would Hope government take towards this issue?
Sexual and gender-based violence towards women, children, and the LGBT community. Priorities to combat this by a Hope government.
It's a real blot, isn't it? What we're seeing from the DPP almost every month, I think they give a report. Again, as we said at the last elections, and something which we will still go with, we prefer, first of all, generally, we would like a think tank part of government to do research and development. And this area, we would like the experts. We don't want to come in with half-baked ideas. We prefer to rely on the experts who have done the studies, and there are lots of NGOs in this country, and quite a few do important work in this area.
Right.
And I'm sure they have policy ideas that they think can help improve, you know, the situation if government worked with them on the issue. And that's what we will do.
Okay. I'm going to just quickly ask the last question, and this would be again from the public. It was sent to us via social media, and we have seen 3 political parties talk about merging. Is there hope for Hope to merge?
We'll take it as it comes. But if you see, like we said again at the last elections, if you listen to all of us, there were really 3 big points of view at the last election. Fiji First had its point of view. The other non-government parties, they all agreed on everything. They signed statements together, they sat together, gave press conferences together. So they were the second view. Ours was the third view.
Right.
Now, if we have those three large groupings, the stage will not be crowded. So I would really urge the other non-government parties who are, still trying to pretend that they're here, there, or whatever, just get together, please. You are one point of view. Make it easier. You are not our point of view, and you are not Fiji First point of view.
Okay, that was a very short and good conversation on the state and the Fijian. Mr. Draunidalo, thank you for joining us. We will see you next time when we return with another guest to talk about the state and the Fijian. Until then, be safe, have a good night. See you.